So, welcome to the PhenomX Healthcast, where we celebrate the phenomenal X chromosome. My name is Colleen Fogarty Draper, and I am a life scientist, a clinical dietitian, and a creator of a company called PhenomX Health. And I am really pleased to have with me today two fearless health practitioners. The first is Julie Freeman, who has her master's degree as well as being a registered dietitian, a licensed dietitian, nutritionist, and a certified yoga instructor. And also Denise Cordero, who is a certified life coach as well as a Reiki master. So I feel like I'm amongst a lot of information potential here and surrounded by like very holistic knowledge between the two of you. And I guess that's why it makes sense that the name of your practice is Intrinsic Wholeness. So welcome to the PhenomX Healthcast.
Thank you, Colleen.
So
Thank you for having us.
I'm so happy to have you and really get to know you today and hear your story, how you got into this. And if it's okay, I'll start with Julie, and maybe you can tell me how you became interested in women's health, not only through the life cycle, but through this time of hormone transition that we focus on a lot, actually, at PhenomX Health, the kind of midlife menopause transformation.
Yes, so that is a loaded question. So my interest in hormonal health began at a very ripe young age of 9 when I started my period. So I started very, very early puberty, had massive hormonal issues. And by the time I was 13 years old, my periods had completely stopped. So my mother, being a good mother, had taken me to 3 different gynecologists at that time because our family doc at that time said, I don't really know what to do with her. And I was put on very strong hormones. And I can remember 1 week in particular in the 8th grade where I had to go take the bus, because that's what we had back in those days, take the bus down to the doctor's office. And every day for 5 days got a shot in each one of my buttocks of progesterone.
Wow.
By the end of the week, I couldn't even sit down because it hurt so much. And so I remember laying in a tub, just crying as a young adolescent. But also, it wasn't only the physical discomfort that I experienced, but the emotional lability. And so that started me on this course of really kind of not only looking at nutrition and physical ways of healing our bodies, but like what's the emotional aspects of things. So no doubt I fell into nutrition as the first part of my career, and then did my graduate work in mental health and counseling and psychology. Went through a lifelong period of lots of hormonal challenges, infertility, miscarriage, et cetera, but actually kind of sailed through my menopause years, surprisingly or not surprisingly, because by that time I had made so many changes in my own life from a nutrition perspective, from a lifestyle perspective, et cetera. And I had a wonderful gynecologist who actually had been the chief of fertility at the Brigham and Women's, which is a conventional hospital. But his advanced work was in functional medicine, and he was a lifesaver in my life, and really helped me to understand things even more so during that transition of menopause, perimenopause into menopause. And so became even more of an interest of mine, as well as just understanding mental health challenges that were riddled throughout my family, and a lot of them being hormonal related. So very early on, I worked with a psychiatrist in Wellesley, Massachusetts, whose focus was on mental health disorders and women's hormones. And that was back in the 80s. So, again, this kind of started way back when and has continued to move forward. So I'm so excited to be hearing this conversation opening up now around the world, around women's health at this next stage of life.
Isn't that cool? And, I feel like intuitively, women have always known there's a strong connection between nutrition and their hormones, even when it wasn't being studied. So when we start talking about the research that has been done, and maybe they're small studies and they're few and far between, but the studies do exist, and talking about them, I think is very comforting because many of us learned that if we ate a whole bunch of sugar right before we got our periods, we'd have terrible PMS, right? But nobody was studying that at the time, and nobody was connecting that with inflammation, or connecting the sugar cravings with low blood sugar because of the state we're in our luteal phase when we're really anabolic and we're using a lot of our carbs. So I really like how we're finally opening up the conversation about something intuitively we've known for so long. I also love the connection that you make with uh, mood, with mental health. One thing that I think is very helpful for women to hear is that this is a physiologic phenomena. Like it's literally not all in your head, right? Because when your hormones change, when you have an imbalance of your hormones like your progesterone and your estrogen, their ratio, when that changes, your mood state changes because your estrogen actually potentiates your neurotransmitter metabolism, right? So without that, you don't feel good, but it's not because you're weak or you can't control the way you think. It's truly a physiological hormone health related phenomena.
Absolutely. Yes. And you may remember the Wortmans, Richard and Judith Wortman, that did a lot of the amino acid neurotransmitter studies back again in the 80s. So great information in terms of, again, neurotransmitter production, serotonin, dopamine, etc., and how that impacts our mood and how that's also correlated with the food that we take in.
Gosh, that's really interesting. Also, to point out that some of this work has been done quite some time ago. And as much as we need to do more research in this area, we also need to do a better job translating what's already been done.
Yes, yes. Yeah, one of my other colleagues, Dr. James Greenblatt, he's in the Boston area as well, but Jim is a functional integrative psychiatrist, and he uses a food is medicine, food as medicine approach first, along with, doing really intricate lab testing to look at these mental states of being. And so he's another person that I've known and have followed for many, many years in terms of the work that he does with connecting nutrition and mental health and mood disorders.
Yeah, he sounds really interesting. And so that really brings me to the next question I have for you, Julie, which is what assessments do you like to use when you're working with a woman in peri or in postmenopause, just going through that transformation?
Yes, that's a great question. So, because we are still an insurance-driven society, I always like to look at what has been done already so that we're not reinventing the wheel. So I look at all their labs, their tests, their office visits for the last couple of years. In addition to that, we have some very detailed assessments that go from pre-birth up until now. That not only is looking at medical health and wellness, but it's looking at family health, it's looking at adverse childhood events, it's looking at environmental exposures, etc. So it's basically a chronology of that woman's life up until now. And then we take a look at how they're eating, what their lifestyle is like, what particular stressors are in their lives at this present time, coalesce all this information together, and then have the initial meeting. And so that initial meeting, as Denise and I can both attest to, is really deep. We're answering questions. We're finding out what are the top 3 things that you'd like to get out of today's visit, and then we begin that conversation and that journey forward. And if there is additional lab testing or functional testing to be done, then we'll do that. Right up front, we're actually using a particular genetics program that is a food and lifestyle genetics-based program, which I really love because I've been using genetics for, oh gosh, probably over about 15 years since it first became in vogue. And many programs are using a pill for every SNP as opposed to really looking at the whole person and the way that they are taking care of themselves in terms of lifestyle and diet. So that's a wonderful, wonderful program that we can look at in terms of where may there be some imbalances in terms of hormones, detoxification, methylation, things of that nature.
I love that you're doing that too, because I think that kind of comprehensive program can be very insightful for women to understand the power of their vegetables and their plants in affecting hormones and being able to get a little more specific and kind of prioritize for themselves what the best choices are for them to make.
Yes.
So I'm curious though, like in terms of like, the assessment process that you go through with the women, what are some of the common nutrition and lifestyle themes that you see?
So I would say lifestyle number one that we're seeing across the board is overwhelming anxiety. I mean, that has to be, I would say, the very first place, even though they may have been referred for allergies, immunology, gastrointestinal, whatever, the first place that we're really seeing things play out. And I think that's across the board. And I believe there's many reasons for that. Beneath that, lots of detox, lots of methylation. And it's what's interesting is it the chicken or the egg? Did they come into the world with these detox methylation defects, or is it our environment? Is it the food? Is it the plastics, the xenoestrogens, and we could go on and on and on, that have damaged the gene, not making it non-functional, but making it less functional. And then beyond that, we're seeing bone health, joints, collagen, things of that nature, mental health, cognitive well-being that would be leading towards more dementia, Alzheimer's later on down the road. And obviously hormonal balance. So those are probably the common areas that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm kind of fascinated with, some of the studies on some supplements that you can use to actually help with the brain fog and the cognition side of things. I think that, it gives me a lot of hope. I think there's so much we can be doing in this space that hasn't been done that we can build on. And yet there's so much opportunity with nutrition, with this do no harm philosophy, to get closer to the root cause of some of these imbalances. So, of course, a key piece of being able to help more women in this space is looking at ways that we can reach out to as many people as possible, right? And we know that digital technology is what helps us do that. But I'm kind of curious because I also know there are pros and cons of this, using this and integrating this into practice. And so I'm curious about how you feel about using technology-based systems with clients, and then maybe, some of the things that you're doing to try to integrate practice with digital technology in a way that you think it can really work for people.
Sure. That's a great question. I have a mixed feeling relationship with technology. All I can say is thank God I have Denise with me, because she's the tech guru of our practice. I'm not the most user-friendly person when it comes to technology in terms of understanding the language. And what we're finding is that I'm not alone. There are many of us that are, over 50. I'm 66 at this point. That don't find that language to be very user-friendly. And so we can become overwhelmed and anxious just from that point alone. Denise and I have identified some of that, and we're actually having a focus group next month to gather some of our clients together and say, what do you think about our platform? Because we have a very robust platform. You can use food, lifestyle, mood journals. You can instant message us on the portal. There's a lot of opportunity for engagement and interaction. And yet some people are using it really well and others not so. So we're always looking for ways to be able to figure out how can we connect. On the one hand, technology has allowed us to become worldwide. You and I are speaking from different countries at this point in time,
Exactly.
which is amazing and fascinating. On the other hand, it's reduced that in-person connection that I know when I first started out in my work over 35 years ago, you would go and you'd meet the doctor and the office manager and you'd develop a relationship and you would have a relationship with your patients. And I remember when I first did telehealth, it was during one of my own health crises, and I was actually quarantined for about 3 months and had been ill for well over a year with a rare leukemia and then Lyme and then staph infection. So I was sort of like out of commission. And it was one of my psychiatrist colleagues at New Wellesley who said, Julie, why don't you use Skype? So this is pre-telehealth days. I said, oh, but I love being with patients. She said, just give it a try. So my first client was actually a Reiki master as well. Perfect person. She said, Julie, your energy came through the internet beautifully. And at that point, I said, okay, I'm sold. I'll be doing this in addition to continuing to figure out ways for us to have community.
It's good for you for being open to trying it, because I think sometimes that's the hardest part, is taking that step into the unknown and, you know, having faith that you're still going to feel the connection with your clients that you need to really help them on their healing journey.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and another piece of this, which also relates to that human connection, right? Maintaining that human connection, even with a global practice, which I know that you aspire to have to reach women all over the world. How do you create that sense of community?
So what we're doing presently is actually having groups. In fact, we're in the middle of our spring clean right now, which is a very short-term 4-week program. We do it in the spring and in the fall. And it's not only lovely for us to have a group of people where we can interact, but clients have come back and said, you know, I really find that having that group atmosphere is really inspirational and it's motivating for me. So that's definitely one area that we do is group connection, and we're going to be increasing that as well. And then we do have aspirations for having retreats in the future, and that's something that both Denise and I have been interested in for many years. And so at some point in time, we will have some type of destination retreat where women can come and refresh, renew, relearn ways of taking care of themselves. Because when you're immersed in that situation, you can practice that and then bring that back to the home. And then we would have ongoing, you know, telehealth support beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really cool. And when I think about even my own work, building a digital health company, working a lot from home, I don't think I'm alone when I say that sometimes I'm a little bit starved for human connection, you know? And, you know, even when we started our chat today, the first thing I told you about was like my emotional state of being, you know, but I think that kind of, you know, that opportunity is less normally when you're speaking in this kind of fashion. But you know, as much as I really am a huge advocate for digital health to really reach out to as many people as possible, I also find more and more I'm craving that human connection. And I love this concept of building retreats, because I think you know, the time is now to do something like that. And even if you're working with people globally, in provided that they have the resources, someone from Europe might be quite excited to come to the United States to do a retreat, because it's a change in environment, and maybe just the kind of change environment they need to continue with their healing journey. So if it's okay, I'm going to switch now to Denise and ask Denise some questions about, you know, about kind of your perspective on your practice. And of course, we need to start with your story. So Denise, how did you become interested in women's health? And with that, you know, of course, I'm interested in the perspective you come as a coach, because you're coming from a kind of a certified life coach perspective, which is a bit more different than, you know, my vantage point as a dietitian and a scientist.
Absolutely. So you know, have been in healthcare or started in healthcare, like in the beginning of my adult life, probably 18, 19 years old. I can even point out to sooner when I was in high school and I was a candy striper. I volunteered in the hospital as a candy striper. So I've been involved in the healthcare medical arena for as long as I could remember. But women's health in particular became of interest to me when I personally felt affected and my health took a toll sometime in my mid-30s. And so that opened up an opportunity for me to think about what does health mean to me? Because at that time, by all accounts, I felt very successful. I was at a pinnacle in my healthcare career in operations and revenue cycle management. I was sought after as a private consultant for practice management and starting up other physician practices. So on the exterior, everything looked wonderful and great. Yet in my interior world, I felt so unfulfilled and I just didn't feel good in my body, emotionally, mentally. I felt depressed. And I think that that's where something began to pivot and it took me down the road of becoming a coach. So all the way to present, getting into coaching and energy medicine and healing on a deeper level. Now, while I had many symptoms at the time, inflammation, I was overweight, I was depressed, all these other things. What I realized that the root cause of it was unhealed trauma. And I wasn't alone. I felt alone, but I wasn't alone. And the more and more I began to speak to other women, it was the same. It was unhealed trauma. It was not finding your voice, not being heard, not being seen, not feeling worthy. And so it's become my passion to really create this space of healing for other women as a coach. And so speaking to the unique perspective of being a coach and not being a clinician is that besides having that, that intimate, I'm a woman, so I've walked in your shoes and I know what you've been through. I don't necessarily pathologize the person, thinking, well, you're depressed or you're anxious or this or the other. I see us as whole beings that have gone through some things in life. We've created coping mechanisms, some maladaptive behaviors that are no longer serving us. And it's, how can I again create that space for healing for other women to truly be seen and truly be heard, so that that inner wisdom can surface and we can remember who we truly authentically are.
I love that you say to be heard, because I think sometimes that's the most important thing, isn't it? To feel heard.
Yes.
When you're processing, when you're bringing some of that subconscious to the conscious, and you need to process it to have a witness.
Yes.
What is coming up for you is very powerful. I also reflect on my own healing journey and coaches, therapists that I've worked with, and how much sometimes someone just says the right thing at the right time, and it brings that information forward for me. And I say, now I get it. Light bulb moment. And so I think having the right person to work with to kind of facilitate that, it's so powerful. I would not be where I am today in my journey without having some people hold my hand along the way, finding my capacity to heal myself. But I needed help from the outside to go within. So I'm really interested in your perspective and how you kind of came to where you're at now. And I'm curious, what kind of assessments that you use in your practice that are maybe different than Julie's, because I'm sure you use some of her assessments and you also work together on the same clients, but what are some of the unique assessments that you use in your practice?
So two of the different assessments that I use are the Wheel of Life and Personal Values assessment. And they help in different ways. One of them, understanding people's personal values really help us to personalize the approach in which we take. Because personal value speaks to what is intrinsically important to that person. And it's their lens, it's the perspective through which they see life in, the things that are their anchor in life. And the Wheel of Life looks at some of the major areas of our life, such as health, career, fun, recreation, financial. So these different aspects, they're important to look at when providing whole person care, because it's not just what's happening in the chemistry or the physiology in the biology, but it's also how everything else comes into play. And what Julie and I find so fascinating, as she was saying, how we take all these data points and coalesce them, is that we find the connections when there is a large gap between our desired outcome, goal, reality, and our actually perceived reality. We also see connections in different, in just unfavorable health outcomes. So we see when things are not going great with family or career, or we're struggling with finances and we have certain insecurities, there's something going on health-wise. There's something, and we've also mapped it out over the timeline when certain health incidents have occurred. And sure enough, there's almost a precursor of some mental, emotional, or something going on in their personal lives that ends up showing up as a physical ailment, as a symptom that they're complaining about. So I love having these assessments, again, because it shows us the big picture of what's going on. And we are able to connect the dots and see that the mental, emotional, the spiritual does affect the physical. It's all connected.
It's all connected. That's so beautiful. And I'm thinking of so many things while you're talking, but I was envisioning how our cells are eavesdropping on our thoughts and emotions and belief systems. And that physiological connection is so powerful. And I love that you put that front and center, because I certainly feel in my own life that when I've had major health events that appear to be physical, oh, I don't know where that came from. Really, I've always known exactly where it's come from. I've known the exact emotional event that preceded it, because well, I've studied, health for so long, like both of you have. But the reality is many people don't realize that. And it's very powerful to make that connection. So I want to take that a little bit further because you're talking about emotional health and well-being, and you just touched on spirituality just a little bit. So can you just tell us about how you take this deeper dive into the sacred, and how this is received?
Yeah. Well, you touched upon it briefly, and this is important, and it's about insight, having that aha moment. And so as a coach, I think one of my greatest tools is being able to evoke that insight. Because once we have that aha moment, the way we see life changes, the way we see things changes. And so this is how we begin to journey into the deeper. The other thing I think about is asking the perennial questions. And I'm still pleasantly surprised how many women haven't been asked, what do you need?
Oh gosh. Yes.
What do you need? And the other one that seems to create a very visceral response when I speak to women is, who are you?
Wow.
Who are you? So these are the questions that I like to ask my clients to sort of as an invitation into that deeper and into that sacred. Who am I? What do I need?
I love that. You just
Where
made
do
me.
we go from here?
Yes. Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here? What do we do with this thing called life? And that in and of itself brings us to a place that is beyond the symptoms that we complain about, beyond the mental and emotional, into that deeper spiritual realm where we long for meaning and purpose and human connection.
That's so beautifully said. And I was just thinking, isn't there a Prince song that starts out with, what is this thing called life? I think there is. It's from the 80s, and
Yeah.
asks that question. So you had me thinking about that. And at the same time, I was thinking about a clip I've seen on social media of Oprah Winfrey being interviewed, and she's asked, like, what is the one thing that can guarantee that someone will be successful in their life and satisfied? And she said the most important thing is when you know exactly what you want.
Yeah.
And you get to that by knowing what you need and who you are. By getting down into that, then you know what you're going after. And you have total clarity on that. It sounds simple, but it is not simple. There's all kinds of diversions we can take from that.
Yes. Yes.
It brings up for me the work that I did many years ago in eating disorders, because that also rears its ugly head, disordered eating and eating disorders with women around the perimenopausal stage, because they're using either food or the lack of food or the overconsumption and the purging of food as their voice. And this is the time when they can actually retire it and say, thank you for being a part of my life. I now have a new set of tools to help me move forward. So that's beautiful.
That is gorgeous. So insightful, using food as your voice. Can personally identify with that, and even a healing moment related to understanding that better. And it was really an exchange with a colleague that brought me to that moment. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes you could just say just the right thing at the right time and spark the insight, help someone go deeper into their own sacred space and really push forward their healing. So I have a final question for you, Denise, which is, talking about women going through the menopause transformation. And from your vantage point, what are some of the common mental, emotional challenges that you see that women are going through during this time?
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of the themes that Julie have, that overwhelm, anxiety, depression, coming back to overwhelm. I think that there's an overwhelm with the to-dos of life. I have this, and I have work, and I have a spouse, or I have children, or it's the parents, the caretaking, the different things, the different to-dos that we have in life, yet an underwhelm with the quality of their life, and underwhelmed with feeling like anything is really truly meaningful. It is nothing more than these are my obligations, or these are my responsibilities, or these are my shoulds. Women have so many shoulds.
So many.
And so one of the things that I like to do is to try to eliminate that should from their vocabulary, from their mindset, from their being, this almost comparison to others, this conditioned, a very conditioned behavior towards the things that we need to do, or there's certain milestones that we need to reach by certain ages or certain times. And a lot of my work with women is looking at that mindset and listening to that inner voice, listening to that inner critic, and what it's telling you about the way that you, quote unquote, should be living your life, and changing the narrative and the story that we oftentimes hold on to.
Oh,
Almost as a survival
yes.
mechanism, and rethink those words, rewrite that story, whereas it can become one of thriving rather than just surviving.
I'm so inspired that I'm taking notes. And what you're saying is really making me think about, why it's so common that women burn out during this time.
Yes.
And whether or not that's a diagnosable thing, but that they reach that point of sometimes physically not being able to function anymore because they're so stuck in this state of obligation and the lack of joy.
Yes.
Huge.
I'd actually like to borrow a thought by Dr. Sarah Gottfried, who's a functional medicine expert and talks a lot about women's health. And she said something that resonated with me, and I can speak to this so much witnessing other women. And that is that when women are in transition and our estrogen begins to decline, it's almost as this estrogen is also a veil, this energetic veil that begins to decline or drop, that allows us to re-examine and look at our life in a different way. And so while, yes, there are these, common themes of overwhelm and anxiety and mood disorders or mental health issues, I also see women in transition, and I speak of myself too, because I'm perimenopausal, so I'm in transition. I see transitions as a phenomenal window and opportunity, an invitation for us to re-examine our lives, to look, to go inwards. And this is why the intrinsic wholeness piece is so near and dear to us. And Julie and I, came up with this intrinsic wholeness because it is about a remembering from within of our wholeness, and shifting that story, shifting the narrative that we're broken and somehow we need to be fixed.
It's so beautiful. I am so passionate about fixing that narrative that we're not broken, but we should be, there should be a much better job in healthcare addressing the needs of women going through this transformation. There are things happening. They don't feel good. We need to help, but it's not because they're broken. They're transforming. They're cocooning and coming out again as another
Beautiful butterfly.
their butterflyness.
Yes. If we look to some of the indigenous philosophy, women are honored for actually being in a time of wisdom. And so, part of our healthcare system really needs to bring together the best of what indigenous traditions have shared with us, along with the amazing conventional technologies that we have. So it's a great opportunity, is what I call the yin and the yang, danger equals opportunity.
Definitely. In Hindi, menopause is referred to as rejuvenatory.
I love
it. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yes.
It really means menopause. It really doesn't mean rejuvenation, but it sounds like rejuvenation. And it sounds so much better to me because it's the transformation, it's the transition, it's an opportunity. It's a life opportunity that if you get it, you're lucky.
Yeah.
I love how you were talking about the veil of estrogen. And now that veil is going away. And as I was writing notes about everything you were saying, which was so cool, I was writing, without the veil, we're naked, authentic, and vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Through that lens, we see who we really are.
Yes.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. I'm curious, just as we kind of start wrapping up things here, if you have any final thoughts, each of you, from our discussion today.
For me, I am, first of all, I'm honored to be here with you today and for the three of us to have this discussion.
Same.
But to be able to reach women in a way that opens the curiosity and allows them to be more of a part of the conversation. One of the things I thought about as we were talking about my journey early on is that there's a lot of Freud still left in our conventional thinking, that women with emotions are hysterical. And unfortunately, that still hangs around. But, it's through these kinds of conversations and discussions that we begin to normalize the conversation, and we begin to raise awareness and entertain the conversation. So I want to just say thank you. And it's been wonderful to be here with both of you.
I feel the same. And you, Denise?
This has been awesome. Thank you so much for inviting us to have this open and authentic conversation, and to also think about this period of transition, wherever women may be, again, as this beautiful invitation and opening to go inward and to be naked, to be authentic, to remember our wholeness, and to see it for the wisdom that we gain as we open up into the beautiful butterfly.
And we do that as practitioners, as scientists, as lay people, as heads of our
Yes.
family, as the key decision makers in healthcare for our family and loved ones. And we're all in this together.
Yeah.
So I too feel very grateful to have this time with you. And I just wanted for our listeners to ask you where you're calling in from today for this podcast. So
I'm in Dominican Republic.
Denise is in the Dominican Republic, and Julie,
I am in Temple, Texas.
you're in Temple, Texas, USA, and I am in Lausanne, Switzerland. So very amazing that we can get together like this and have this kind of exchange. And so I want to highlight for our listeners today that you can reach out to Julie and Denise via their website, intrinsicwholeness.com. You can also find them on Facebook as Intrinsic Wholeness, as well as Instagram and LinkedIn. And we will provide these links in the description of this podcast today. And I want to thank our listeners for joining and wish you all the best in health.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.